Welcome, my friends and enemies. Glad you are here. Uh, this particular video is something that's near and dear to my heart personally. Um, for those of you who've been following for a while now, and those of you who are, I guess, fairly new, you can learn this pretty quickly. I have a history with fan fiction, and it's a very not so great of a relationship. um, I pretty much despise fan fiction in virtually every form it has taken in every way possible. Why, you might ask? Well, let's just say I don't like when you disrespect the author by making something and then trying to come off as if you improved upon their work. Now, this does not mean that you writing a fan fiction is not technically improving upon the work, because it is technically possible for you to improve upon the work. It is possible. However, that doesn't necessarily mean it aligns with what the author intended or the original creator intended. So whether it's movies, TV shows, video games, books, more commonly books, just because you write something does not mean it's God's gift to gift to Earth and humankind, and just in general, it doesn't mean it's good. I have noticed a lot of people who write fanfic typically write what they deem is good. The problem with this is that it very rarely is good. So, on a rare occasion, you'll find somebody who respects the author enough to lean into the source material, not declare credit for making a masterpiece. They're not egotistical about it. They just want to promote the source material in whatever way they possibly can, but also add something that would highlight the source material as even better than it already was. And that to me is respectful to do it. I might not personally read, watch, participate, whatever, in it, but I can at least acknowledge that that's them putting their love into it. Not because they did some stuff and then chucked their own stuff in the corner, but in something that is very much something they put love and care and wanted to say, like, I really support this person's work. I want to support the story they created, the characters they created, whatever it is about it that they want to emphasize. And they're trying to do it as a homage rather than a takeover, if you will. That I have a little bit more understanding for, and I can respect that as an attempt. I may not enjoy the content myself because I'm more of a source material purist, if you will, where I was like, nothing's going to beat the source material. But if you did come across something that it did write better, it's usually because the person who did have their source material didn't do a very good job. That doesn't mean it's not popular. It just means they didn't do a good job. Because unfortunately, the reality of life and everyday existence is that just because you make something doesn't mean it's good, but it doesn't mean it's not going to be popular, because everybody wants to jump into a bandwagon to be somebody and be like, look at me, I'm on board with it as well. I'm so chill, I'm so cool, I'm all whatever the kids these days say. So, if that's the case, then is it not the case that popularity does not make good content? Good content can be good content and never be popular. It's that unexplored cave to the side that's got mountains of treasure of gold, weaponry, legendary stuff, but no one's ever found that cave. It is possible that that is the case. It is, however, not possible to have a ginormous room full of poo and then call it good. Doesn't matter how many people you fit in that room, it doesn't make it good. It's still poo on the walls. It's still mountains of poo everywhere. It's bantha poodoo, if you will. So it wouldn't make sense to say, oh, well, there's more people in this cave or in this big room than in that cave, therefore this is better quality. No, there's still legendary treasure and goodies and stuff that's there waiting to be found. You just haven't found it. Now, more often than not, the legendary stuff is found, right? You've got Lord of the Rings, the Tolkien Legendarium. You've gotten C.S. Lewis's Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Chronicles of Narnia, and that kind of stuff. You've gotten Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time. I hesitate to say George R. R. Martin, Song of Fire and Ice. I don't particularly consider it a masterpiece, though it has parts that are extremely well done. I just don't consider it a masterpiece personally. Doesn't mean it's not. It's just personally, I don't think it qualifies. But people like it. It's popular, whatever. But these are things that people can find really easily. They can jump into really easily. And they're things that typically sell pretty well. So when you jump into that, you're like, okay, well, it doesn't have to be the greatest, which is true, to be popular or to be good. And that's probably the middle of the road. But more often than not, we'll see something that has no actual value to it become really popular, at least for a time, and then it'll slowly drift when people realize this isn't as good as I thought it was going to be originally. And we've seen that with quite a few things, which we'll go into further detail throughout the video. But my relationship with fanfic is not at a great start. It's not in a great place, and I personally think it does more harm than good most of the time. It does not mean all the time, but most of the time. That being said, you probably, if you've watched any of my older videos, are familiar with The Second Story, or Hilary Lane, the author who runs that channel, and it's her channel. And she makes really good commentaries on a variety of topics surrounding either books, stories in general, that kind of a thing. And I appreciate her work because it's very eye-opening. But I also think that more people need to understand the nuances of things that she says, which is why I try to throw my 2 autistic cents into the ring to kind of help other people understand, people who are familiar with my viewpoints, help understand not just her viewpoints, but my viewpoints, and maybe something that they haven't thought about. Because sometimes when somebody watches a video, they don't get it the first time. But then when somebody comes along and says, hey, let me translate this a little bit for you, and it's like, oh, and then light bulb goes off. Because, I mean, I've read Wheel of Time so many times, and I always learn something new. So there's no shame in not knowing something immediately or not getting it right away. It's more shame when you don't bother trying to learn. That's the more shameful thing. So hopefully this will be eye-opening. Her takes are fantastic, and probably don't need that much translation, honestly. But sometimes I can tie them into things and topics that I've talked about priorly, or will eventually be talking about in the future, etc. Because there's always a fanfic of something. So I will try not to hit my mic. Fail already. So Hilary Lane will be talking about fanfiction. So let's just give it a twirl, shall we?
First things first, and I really want all of you to hear me, I am aware that good fan fiction exists. Or to be more accurate, I know that good fan fiction is possible. And I know that fan fiction in itself is a neutral thing, like all of fiction, and can be good or bad depending on the writer. I know that there are probably...
I think I touched upon that earlier, but just to clarify, it can be good, it just rarely is good. Let's just say the people who admire well-made stories, well-made content, etc., typically don't try to one-up it or try to stand upon it or hostile take over it because they admire that work and are just fans of that work. But on a rare occasion, you'll have people who will come in and say, I appreciate this work, but I will also like to add something to it to maybe tie up some loose ends that maybe the author didn't have time to do or didn't want to do or whatever, and it only bolsters the original. It's kind of what they do in like theory forum posts for like fandoms.
People out there, or at least there were at some point, who wrote genuinely excellent stories set in worlds of someone else's creation. I know that it is possible to write good fan fiction. However, in recent years, despite any outlying works of alleged genius, and they are outlying and not the norm, fan fiction has developed a manifestly particular kind of image and reputation. The aesthetics of fan fiction, if you'll allow me, have become a very specific sort. And that image and those aesthetics have broken internet containment and entered mainstream literature and storytelling. When I say fan fiction, In a crowded room, 90% of the people in that room immediately receive the mental image of the same general type of storytelling, which, by the way, is not a very flattering one. Regardless of what you personally...
It is funny when somebody writes fan fiction on not good content and then it turns out to be, worse. Because they weren't good at writing to begin with, because they were only interested in fan fiction. They weren't interested in their own content. Where it's better to start on your own, create your own, and then go from there into something where it is of itself naturally higher because your own imagination came up with it, as opposed to relying on every other piece of content that is around you to come up with even a smither of, well, anything. And so when somebody comes up and says, hey, I wrote this, story based off of this thing, it's like, so it's not as good as the other thing? Because you don't need them for you to have your own good story. So if you write your own story, and it could be a very, very simple story, it could be 20 pages long, whatever, it could technically be miles above the quality of slop writing that has 600 pages in it. It's not a high bar, guys. It's really not. So I would encourage you to write your own stuff, or program it if it's in games or whatever. Like, you get the point. Like, make your own content, whether it's books, music, movies, TV shows, video games, board games, card games, anything really. Whatever you make, your own designs, your own thought creations, etc., is almost always going to be better than you copying somebody who's not that good. That's just what it is. Because now you're gonna stifle your own creativity. You're gonna stifle your own ability to explore, or you're just gonna be stunted forever. The alternative is make your own stuff, be more creative, consume inspiration, but do not consume content. Do not treat their content as, oh, well, if I write a story with the same thing where they have the young hero coming in and I'll have the young hero coming in, they have this big obstacle, I'm going to have a big obstacle, and you do it like that, you're trying to copy them, and they weren't good to begin with. So do what the greats did, which is come up with their own stuff. You could take inspiration as like, I want a hero's journey. Wow, that's great. You're not copying anything. But if you're like, I want a hero's journey, and then the main character is going to get left this jewelry that's very precious, and it's also the key to everything in terms of it can destroy the world, so we need to destroy it. And so I have this really tall dude with a pointy hat who comes and helps him along his journey, and then he gathers friends around him, and they go on this year-long adventure. It's like, okay, now you're just ripping somebody off. But saying I want a hero's journey, there's nothing wrong with that. Tropes exist for a reason, and it's very difficult, if not nigh impossible, to get away from every single trope. There's always going to be a trope, and if you don't start with somebody else's trope, you'll create a trope. Therefore, you don't escape the tropes, because the tropes exist. So keep that in mind. Let's move on.
Might think about fan fiction, the community, and the majority of known works, and crucially the influence of fan fictionism has had on the rest of the storytelling media, has a very, very specific philosophy and aesthetic. Singling out your own personal favorite works cannot change that fact. When I made my little jab at fan fiction in my video on the rise of smut in fiction, many
very good video, by the way. I did a cover of it.
Many people came crawling out of the woodwork to send me various strongly worded messages about how wrong I was because, that one particular XYZ fanfic was good, actually, and because not all fanfiction...
It's good because they don't have a sense of taste when it comes to source material. Of course it's good. It's of course good. Sure, whatever you say, Karen.
...is smutty, actually. Listen, I don't really care. I get it. Some of you like to read or write fan fiction, and some fan fiction is, to you, worth your time. But I'm talking today about the broad idea of what fan fiction generally has come to embody and...
Also, if you ever do write fan fiction, because I'm not saying don't do it, I'm just saying be mindful. When you do write fan fiction, give it to someone who's not your sycophant. And say, could you read this and let me know what your thoughts are? That's how you know if something's good or not. But if you just give it to your best friend or your spouse, and they're going to sing your praises all the time because they don't want to sleep on the couch, then you're not going to get an honest response back. You need to say, Do you think this is good? And they'll say, well, I like this part, but I didn't like this part. Or they'll just say the whole thing is terrible and you need to stop doing whatever this is and work on something else because it's better time spent. But like, don't just think, well, I wrote it, therefore it's good. Or I read it, therefore it's good. That's not how that works. There's lots of books out there that you can read that are terrible and you're just not going to get anywhere with them. So don't waste your time trying to pucker yourself up with your ego. It's going to hurt you a lot more in the long run.
Mean in current year. So if you like fan fiction, that's your business. But before you get all fired up and start filling the comment section with angry remarks about how it's, not all fan fiction or whatever, try to take a step back and honestly observe the overall reputation that fan fiction has to the general reading public. Another quick side note, a lot of people seem to really appreciate the list of additional information that I provided with my video about reading education. This particular topic, fan fiction, is not something a lot of people outside those communities are going to know a lot about, and I spent months doing research. So to help, I've put together a small companion document on my website that provides links to some relevant studies and data, as well as more information on fanfiction in general, and also some of the more disturbing fanfiction content, scandals, and other issues of interest to outside observers who genuinely want to educate themselves. Some time ago, I said to a friend half as a joke that through no fault of its own, Harry Potter was about 70 to 80% responsible for the degradation of modern literature. And while that observation is still valid, I think it's far more accurate to say that the strange, unprecedented way in which Harry Potter collided with fan fiction is the real problem. In that sense, it would be more accurate to say that fan fiction is 80 to 90% responsible for the degradation of modern literature. And that statement is something I stand by. An essay I read recently, which I subsequently misplaced, observed that Harry Potter was the series that launched 1,000 ships. For those who don't know, a ship is when fans of a story will root for two characters to get into a relationship. Hence, ship.
Also, the lowest form of fandom possible. If you're voting for someone to get together and they don't, and you still push them together, you're the problem. If you're like, oh, I found these two characters and they haven't gotten together yet, but there's still more series left, I hope they get together, there's nothing wrong with that. It's when something's coming out and you say, you need to put these two together because I said so, that's a problem.
A person could be said to ship two characters, that is, hope they get together. In more modern usage, however, ship means that as far as that fan is concerned, those two characters should be together, or even are together, regardless of what the story says. And never
And if you ever place your opinion over the story, you are also the problem.
before in history had this been as huge of an almost global cultural reality as it was during the heyday of Harry Potter. In truth, Harry Potter did something that was entirely unheard of in history, entirely by accident. Beginning with children's books, the series became an international sensation, and what was really unusual was that the length of the series allowed it to be a constant companion to an entire generation of children. Never before in history, in quite this way, had an entire generation grown up alongside a widely beloved group of fictional children. From elementary school through high school graduation and sometimes even college, Harry Potter and co. were all there too, and due to the nature of modern society and how modern people, especially young people, engage with stories, which we'll talk more about in a minute, this full absolute immersion had the most profound emotional and formative impact. Do you think YA literature is partly to blame for the decline in literature right now?
Personally, I think we should skip YA and go straight to just adult stuff from kids stuff because the YA just now it's full of slop. Back when I was a kid, it was partially filled with slop, but I think that when authors play it safe with their content, it does a disservice to quality because you'll have kids trying to read stuff and then they slowly move into the YA category and it's not as good. Like you could fit Lord of the Rings in multiple categories. It can be a children's thing, like The Hobbit. You could do young adult, like Lord of the Rings, or you could do adult, like Lord of the Rings. But you can be an adult, and in the adult category, it's still like The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Like the category itself, it spreads, or the book itself, or the series, or the work goes into and transcends all those categories and just says, I can fit in any one of these, just dependent upon how the media is. Like, for example, excuse me, if you wanted to do The Hobbit, you could have a graphic novel, you could have a children's illustration, lots of ways you could do it. And then you get to young adult, and then you're writing a little bit less illustration and a little bit more words and designs, a little bit more adult like, but it still has some fun stuff in it. And then you get to the adult version, and it's all words, maybe occasionally with illustrations, especially if they're done by the professor himself. See Red Book right there. And you being able to just appreciate it more than just the pretty art or the pretty, cover or whatever. You're reading the words and understanding as you get older. This is much, much better.
Think fanfiction. Specifically, think Twilight, which was originally a work of Harry Potter fanfiction. Do you think E.L. James's 50 Shades of Grey is a major offender in the rise of smut in modern society? Think fanfiction. 50 Shades of Grey was originally Twilight fanfiction. And the list goes on and on and on and on.
Then you have a fanfiction of a fanfiction of a fanfiction of a source material, and then it just keeps going backwards, where everything will always be fanfic of something that eventually was original, but they're just writing the same thing over and over again.
On forever. So yes, in a sense, Harry Potter got the ball rolling, but there wouldn't have even been a ball to roll had we not had fan fiction. But no matter what series started it, Pandora had opened the box, the bell had been rung, etc., etc. Fan fiction was here to stay. Worse than that, fan fiction was making tangible contributions to the shape and trajectory of literature and culture. And as a result, both have suffered massively. And we're going to talk about it. At some point, this was probably the early 2010s, I, naive, foolish, innocent, ventured onto AO3, that is Archive of Our Own, the main online fanfiction hub for the last 15 years or so, to see what there was to see. We're going to talk more soon about what a casual traveler is likely to find when...
I can feel the pain emanating from her and the pain in her eyes, because I too have experienced that from people who think they're excellent writers and in fact are not. And it is surprisingly traumatizing, and I sympathize with Otto.
Walking the highways and byways of sites like AO3, but first I want to talk about some general observations I've made about the influence of fan fiction on popular culture and the literary world, and then we'll break down each one at a time. First, fan fiction is directly responsible for the epidemic of self-insert characters and self-insert mentality.
So, for those of you who are not aware, when you play a game in the gaming community, whatever style, genre, whatever, a lot of the time in recent years, explicitly in recent years, but it's also been back then as well, but not as bad as it is now, where people would literally just take themselves and put them in the game because we totally care about who they are. We don't. We really don't. And the self-insert mentality is also, well, I believe the world operates this way or should operate this way, and therefore the characters also must as well. And it's a very modernist take on things, where instead of just letting the world take its toll based off of its world, like for example, if you have a world in which something is wrong in that world, but you might deem it right in this world, or vice versa, where you think it's wrong and the world thinks it's right. You decide, well, I'm going to make it so it's the way I think it because it needs to agree with me, which is terrible storytelling, by the way.
That has pervaded the entirety of storytelling across all mediums. Second, fan fiction is directly responsible for the smut apocalypse that has devastated.
Well, it's because normal writers wouldn't write nearly the smut that they do now. Like even the romance books back even when I was a kid in the 90s, they were romance, not nearly as much probably smut. Like, I mean, there's smutty romance, but like it was more focused on the romance and less on, I, the writer, am getting with this super hot dude or whatever. Like, you just didn't have that. And now it's everywhere. It's in every genre. It's an infestation. It needs to be burnt.
literature. Third, fan fiction is directly responsible for the meta derivative nature of storytelling that is starting to become dominant. Related to that, fan fiction is partly responsible for the overall drop in literary quality and is directly responsible for the degradation of the art of writing, including but not limited to dismal world building and one dimensional characters, as well as the elevation of arguably non literary approaches to certain styles, such as the disproportionate use of present tense. The first issue is most definitely the most important, and we're going to approach it more broadly than mere self-insertism, because the real issue there, the core issue, is the immense, inherently self-indulgent nature of fan fiction as it is in current year, and has been for probably at least 2 or 3 decades. This aspect, self-indulgence, is the first thing I want to cover, mainly because it's by far the most important. It informs everything else. So what do I mean when I say that fan fiction is self-indulgent? First, let's look at the definition of self-indulgence. To indulge oneself or one's inclinations. And indulgence itself is defined as, among other things, over-leniency, gratifying appetites and desires, lack of restraint, giving way to temptation or inclination, yielding to gratification. I know that there are some people who would hear all this and genuinely find nothing wrong, but I think an honest person who seeks to better and master himself or herself as a person or as a writer would recognize that such tendencies are damaging and courting disaster. Self-indulgence prioritizes pleasure over difficulty. Self-indulgence turns restraint.
In other words, when you have a character who always succeeds and never fails, the character who is just better at everything than everyone else at the start and doesn't go through any hardships to grow and become an actual character. Instead of a character, they're a monolith. And it's like, why can't you just be a character that goes through a bad day? Like you spilled your coffee and you decided to go make another cup of coffee or brew some more coffee. And in the process, you're like, well, let's get the stuff. You gather around your stuff, and in the process, you accidentally knock something into the coffee that you were about to brew. And you don't realize until after you've poured your cup of coffee and taken your first sip. And then you're like, oh, wow, this is way better. What was it that went into this? And you look around, you find what happened to go into the coffee brew. And then turns out you just made excellent coffee with bad coffee, right? Well, you wouldn't have gotten that unless you went through some hardship of dropping your coffee and be like, oh, I gotta go make some more coffee. You go make your own coffee, and then in the process, you bump something into it when you weren't intending to. Things that were unfortunate led you to something fortunate. That's storytelling. That's good storytelling. It doesn't have to be like that exactly every single time, but it's hardship that leads to fortune. Now, modern-wise, they'll write it to where, I didn't spill my coffee. I'm too good to spill my coffee. I could never spill my coffee. I finished that completely, and I decided I was going to get a second cup of coffee. So I went to go get the second cup of coffee. But I was like, what if I added all these other random ingredients? And lo and behold, it was the greatest coffee the world has ever seen. That's the kind of writing we have now, which is trash, because that's not how that works. But
Self-discipline and self-mastery into problematic trigger words that are deemed some form of elitism or ableism or some kind of big badism. But what does self-indulgence mean in literature? Are we talking really long stories or long sentences or big vocabularies? Are we talking purple prose or an excess of adverbs? No, actually not at all. Those are all stylistic issues, and every writer, just like every artist, has his or her own style and will spend their lifetime perfecting and honing that style, even if some people hate it or call it inferior to other styles. Style is not what we're talking about here. No, self-indulgence for a writer means that every storytelling choice made by the writer is prioritizing the writer's fantasies, pleasure, appetites, and desires over the story, the characters, or the overall quality. To be clear, I do not mean that writers shouldn't write what they like or enjoy, but rather that writers who are honestly trying to write the best story they can,
it's not what you write, it's how you write it,
and who are prioritizing the good of the story will very often put their fantasies and their emotional appetites and desires aside in order to make the story better. A self-indulgent writer would never do such a thing because the primary function of writing for a self-indulgent writer is personal gratification. And this necessitates the avoidance of anything that is particularly uncomfortable to the writer. Self indulgence means that villains can't be too disturbing, or rather, the wrong kind of disturbing, as that would be uncomfortable for the writer to write. Or, to borrow the new popular adjective, it would be icky, which is where we get genocidal mania.
I'm sorry, I kind of cringed she said that because I understand what she's saying. It was funny that she said it.
Maniacs who are nevertheless really good at sorting out their minions' pronouns, and also would never use a racial slur. Being a genocidal maniac will, in some ways, serve the emotional needs of the writer, sure, but those emotional needs would be harmed if the villain was insensitive to gender issues. Say, self indulgence.
Which is, I mean, it's obviously clearly bad writing, but it also takes you out. It breaks immersion. It takes you out of the story. It creates this like, well, I'm a monster, but I'm not as much of a monster to, mix my chocolate with my honey. Like, oh, that's terrible. I mean, chocolate and honey is actually really good. But I'm saying, like, in terms of that, doing something that they perceive, like, oh, I'm a villain, and I, massacred hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, but I would never have pineapple on pizza, the abomination, kind of thing. Like, it's like, really? That's where you draw the line? That's where you say no? That's insane. I mean, they are insane because they just genocided hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, but they're like, I'm not that insane. And it's just like, bro, if you're that crazy, you don't have limitations. You'll do anything you want to. You be as hedonistic as possible. But saying that, like, I would never say this bad word because it's a potty word, or it's a word that somebody might take as insensitive or something, and oh, we can't have that. That's not a character. That's you.
Means the heroes will have long conversations with each other about popular current year political issues, despite the fact that they live in 13th century England or 38th century Saturn or some random medieval fantasy setting.
Also known as presentism. So, presentism is when you insert something from the here and now into something that is not of the time period.
Self-indulgence demands above all representation, something we're going to talk about more in a minute here, but that's why you get an abundance of people of, say, African descent in stories set in Scotland in the 11th century, for example, or stories in which people who were not of period-accurate English ethnicity in most or all of ruling classes of Georgian Britain, with no reasonable explanation.
We was Britons and stuff. That's the explanation.
Period accuracy is completely irrelevant to the self-indulgent writer who is only writing to feed his or her own personal fantasies and emotional needs. As I said, we'll get
and to feed those that also agree with them, because every writer needs their sycophants.
more into self-representation in a bit here. Self-indulgence is what drives writers to put themselves in their own stories, as often the main characters. Insanely, not only is this common in current year, it's also encouraged. Writers are told to write based on their emotions and their desires and needs. Writing is approached at best therapeutically and at worst narcissistically instead of artistically.
And most of the time, they're both narcissistic and therapeutic to that person. And they somehow believe, through narcissism, that makes the story good. Well, it helped me, so it'll help others. Help other people vomit, sure. But, like, no. This does not have anything to do with the character. This has everything to do with how you perceive the character should or shouldn't do things. Like, and I get that some writers, they do this. They base off of things that they understand or things that they know. I personally, when I write, which is not probably going to be nearly as good as Hillary's, but when I write, I like to write characters of a variety of personalities, political ideology, whether it be like this guy's authoritarian, this guy's, pro-freedom, it's like a rebel faction going up against, tyrannical governments or something like that, for the political aspect of it. But also, you have people who are like, some are caring, some are not, is the nice way to say it. You got people who are very friendly to kids and some that harm kids, because that's the character. That's how you know certain aspects. Like, I know this character's bad, but how bad are they? And then they do something extremely bad, and you're like, oh, that's really bad. And then it's like, no, I want that person to go away permanently, 6 feet below, forever, and beyond forever. In the afterlife, I want them to be gone. Like, you really despise the character because what they do. It's like, well, yeah. But if you have every like evil mustache twirling villain that, aha, I spilled coffee on your report this morning, Lieutenant Kerfuffle. That's a villain. I mean, that's a jerk, sure, but a villain? That's a villain? Because to some people, if they go beyond that, it's too much. I can't do it. If I do it, I'll never be the same. Please stop. But also something I like to do is I like to give a character a starting personality. I like to give them, say, okay, this character cares about flowers, kind of like Samwise Gamgee. They like to see things grow, and they want to go that they want to see that develop, and then with that personality, they have a softer demeanor than, say, another person. And as other characters interact with them, they grow and develop more personality beyond just that one thing. Like a person who comes in and murders their significant other in the middle of the garden on top of all the flowers. So it's a double whammy. You killed all my plants, you killed my spouse or significant other, blood's everywhere. This is terrible. And then you give them a proper burial. You have to restart from scratch in the garden. But you also got to go get the bad guy who did the damage. Or bad woman, I guess. Bad guy in the broad sense. So when that happens, now you either become vengeant or you become harder and less soft. At least when you're not around your flowers or something. Like while you're near your recently deceased significant other's body, you're very soft and you're very sorrowful. And when you're near the flowers, you feel the urge to help them grow. But when you're looking for the bad guys, you're not so soft. You're not so sorrowful. You're vengeful, or revenge is on your mind to the point where it's beyond any going back to even doing what you once did. It's just it's an evolution of the personality. But not because I'm writing them that way per se, but because the things that happen around them, if you take on the perspective of that individual character, even if they're a side character, how would this thing affect them? Do it for all your characters that are involved with the scene, and their personalities can go in wildly different directions. And I'm not making or forcing it that way, but because I said so, I'm allowing the characters to develop it themselves based upon their personality. A person who's kind, that is slighted, will probably still be kind after they are slighted. A person who sees a kind person being slighted and does not appreciate that will be harsher towards the person who slighted the kind person, but still maintain an air of attraction to the kindness. They like not an attraction in a sexual, romantic, or anything like that, but in the kind of like they want that person to still be kind afterwards. It's like the bully picking on the weak kid who's kind, and the person who wants to stop the bully from bullying the weak kid, but appreciates the kind kid's kindness. So there's a dynamic amongst characters, and you let them naturally flow based upon whatever that scenario might be. So in that way, it makes it a little bit easier for me to understand my characters, as opposed to me just saying, you this way, you this way, you this way. And I'm probably one of the few people in the world who actually do it this way, just because it's probably easier just to tell your characters what to do. I find it more interesting and entertaining to myself to see how they develop. And then I'll have just like an outline of points they have to hit to progress the story. And they'll get to there when they get to there. I might have to forcefully speed it up, or like in terms of like, oh, this is all Exodus nonsense that I need to curb it and guide it back towards the story. But all in all, I try to let them do as much as they can as characters, almost like they're AI learning about themselves, but they have a full-fledged human personality, emotions, characteristics, and all that kind of stuff.
In a world where art itself is inherently subjective, the only subject matter of any importance can and must be the writer. All right. So, how does fan fiction produce this specific attitude towards literature and storytelling? Well, buckle up, because we have some bumpy ground to cover. Fan fiction, as I've said, has been around forever. There are some crazy folks out there who would go as far as to say that Dante's Divine Comedy is fan fiction. I think people who say that don't have a very good grasp on the spirit of medieval literature and approach stories with a fixed modern view, but Sure. Fan fiction, so to speak, has always been around. People tell stories, and then other people tell other stories in that same world with those same characters. Absolutely. We've talked a bit about cultural decay and the prevalence of postmodern philosophy on this channel already. We've also talked about how the modern way in which children are taught to read, with a strong emphasis on personal emotional interpretations of texts, that are guided by their superiors, of course, alters their ability to both think and write. So you should already understand what I mean when I say that the bulk of modern writers have a very different approach to the art and the practice of telling a story than used to be the norm. To call it self-indulgent is probably too kind, but the average young person with storytelling aspirations has, for at least a decade, been almost exclusively emotion-driven in every way. They have also been brought up saturated in the moral and cultural landscape created by social media: attention-seeking, self-absorption, narcissism, propaganda, emotional generative hot words, pop culture trends masquerading as important social themes, critical literacy, and the poisonous influence of internet politics have created anxious, fragmented, hollow creatures who nevertheless crave meaning and profundity in their stories. Combine that with the enormous emotional battering ram that they receive in college literature and creative writing classes. Combine that with the online influence.
And the people running those classes and running those types of things that are teaching other people how to do it are full of people who are guilty of the same thing that Hillary's talking about. They're the ones who do this self-insert, self-indulgence. They graduated and went out and taught people this stuff. And through teaching them, well, now it's perpetuated an endless cycle of this because no one told them, actually, that's not that good, which is kind of a problem with professors or teachers in general, is that when they teach good stuff, it's good. When they teach bad stuff, it's bad. And most of the time, the kids go along with it because they don't know any better. They don't realize it's incorrect. They don't realize that there's better quality stuff. They just do it because.
Of intensely aesthetically and emotionally self-indulgent online environments like Tumblr. Combine that with things like masculinity and femininity being under constant, confusing, endlessly shifting assault by the cultural police of our modern society. Many of these would-be writers then turn to their favorite stories for escape, stories they grew up with and which are, to them, a kind of cultural and narrative safe space. Stories in our times now like Twilight, Percy Jackson, Star Wars, My Hero Academia, Naruto, Sailor Moon, or, Harry Potter. Some more classically minded writers will fall in love with the Iliad or the Odyssey or Shakespeare, but none of these stories are exactly what these emotionally formed types of readers need in order to feel emotionally fulfilled in our constantly changing society in which emotions are the only valid currency. So they take to fan fiction to change these stories or characters or update them or shift things around so the story satisfies some specific fantasy or emotional desire. This can be relatively harmless, like a fan fiction in which Hamlet gets his revenge and then lives happily ever after with Ophelia. Or it can be incredibly disturbing, like fan fiction in which Princess Leia develops a romantic and sexual attraction to Jabba the Hutt during her captivity. And that's probably the tamest fan fiction I saw in AO3. In a normal world, such a diversion would be, in some cases, harmless.
You can tell that's a self-insert. That is most definitely a self-insert.
And short-lived, which is to say, this kind of thing, minus the disturbing perversions, is normal in young teens, and then they grow out of it. In our society,
they should grow out of it.
People don't really grow out of anything. Ours is a society in which people have developed a prolonged, almost eternal childhood. This is aided by the immense prevalence of emotions. But regardless of the reason, if emotions rule, then emotions will always be served. And if luxuriating in fan fiction in which your favorite characters don't die and get together in the end makes you happy, you'll never stop. Because why would you? The story makes you happy, and being happy is the
I can kind of relate when it comes to like watching anime and it turns into be like a rom-com slice of life or something, and I'm like, oh, I like this character and I like their love interests, and I kind of want them to be with this one, this one, this one, and this one, or this one, or this one, or this one, or this, or this one, but not that one, 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 because reasons. And usually it's based upon they have no actual emotional, relational connections, they have no past connections, or they do have past connections, it's just not very good connections, and it's like a bully falling in love with the bullied. And it's just kind of like, no, I like. But then there's sometimes where it's like, you have these two girls and they're both excellent, and you're like, okay, well the guy should get with both of them rather than one of them be destroyed by the fact that they weren't able to make the cut, kind of a thing. It's like, well, then you can have an actual happy ending as opposed to the third and fourth, fifth girl that show up, but they're not good people. They don't care about the person's feelings, and they just want to go in there and bulldoze it just because they can, and they get off on it. I get it's not very good writing from my perspective, but I like that because, well, I mean, for one, I don't know how common that actually is in real life. Maybe it's more common in Asia, like in Japan and stuff, than it is in America. It just doesn't exist in America as far as I've seen it. But it's like I'd rather them be happy than I'd rather them be destroyed, right? And there's some weird stuff to it.
Only thing that matters, right? And it's not like you're hurting anyone. As this indulgence is indulged, its grip on the mind of the reader and writer becomes strong enough to overwhelm anything else. A fan fiction that meets the specific emotional needs of the reader will always be better than anything on the shelves. A fan fiction in which the right character does the right things and says the right things and has the right opinions and has the right things happen to them will absolutely be deemed superior to, say, War and Peace, which I'm sure is probably pretty problematic. I don't know, have we canceled Tolstoy yet? Not that there's not, War and Peace fan fiction. I know what you're thinking.
Oh my
Why is
gosh.
it wrong to be happy? Why is it wrong to pursue something that is in itself not harmful but makes you happy?
Because it's worse than AI slop, and everybody agrees AI slop is bad. Like, there's not an easy way to say this.
How is it any different to write a sappy fanfic than it is to write a novel of some other sort? Aren't all writers self indulgent? No, actually, they're not, and it is different. The difference is that an honest writer who is pursuing self betterment and excellence knows that sometimes the story needs things that he or she or the world doesn't necessarily like a villain who does vile things, or at least things that could potentially get him canceled on social media, like, say, a villain like Loki in the first Avengers making misogynistic remarks to a woman. I remember seeing people on Tumblr really struggling with that and refusing to believe that their beloved Loki would ever do such a thing, even as a villain. Or a hero or heroine who does something wrong and has to try to make it right, like Jane Austen's Emma. Or sometimes a story simply doesn't need the 17-page description of the main character losing her virginity, and so the writer removes it. All of these represent writers not basking in self-indulgence. Instead, choices are made not based on the fantasies and emotional desires of the writer, but on the best way to tell the best story. Please bear in mind, the best story and self-indulgence are somewhat subjective. A lot of it depends on the specific writer and the specific story. For some writers, giving into their emotional desire to have a happy ending no matter what is what constitutes self-indulgence. For other writers, giving into the emotional desire to have everything be constantly bleak and tragic no matter what is what constitutes self-indulgence. For other writers, having the entire story built around how hot the werewolf CEO is what constitutes self-indulgence. Often an unbiased, reasonable reader can recognize self-indulgence when they see it. Sometimes what it is a constant battle taking place at the writer's desk. Here's an example. If you look at the earlier versions of Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian, you'll find that things like heavily emotional scenes had been cut. There's even one scene in which a glimmer of kindness from the kid was completely removed. Keeping them would have indulged McCarthy's own comfort with his characters, his desire to like them in a specific way, or even just inject his own personality or inclinations into his character's behavior. But he was certainly not self-indulgent, so they were cut because he believed that would best serve the story as he was writing it. You tell me if you think the final version was better or worse as a result. And I'm not saying that all.
And I would say, and I've not read that story, but I would say that method of a person indulging themselves but then deciding to cut it because it would damage the story. That recognition, or that ability to understand as a creator that just because you did it doesn't mean it's golden. It's something that could harm the characters or even the readers. You can harm the readers by making them believe false things, by believing, oh, this is actually okay, when it's really not okay. They take to it like a fly on, well, garbage. It's just That's the nature of people's ability to comprehend one from the other. Now, if you have a story in which you're like, I'd really like this and I want it to go this way, but it doesn't really fit this story, then you just create a totally different story in a totally different world setting, totally different character building, and then have that happen in that story where it does make sense, where it does fit. There are certain things that they don't fit because it's not how the world is. We'll get a little into that later.
Writing has to be as emotionally and descriptively sparse as McCarthy's, or that emotions or descriptions are inherently self-indulgent. But he was specifically pursuing a particular style in his work, and part of that pursuit was creative honesty and constant betterment. Creative honesty, by the way, does not mean bearing one's soul on the page. It means assessing honestly whether or not something is the best it can be according to one's goals, style, and abilities. McCarthy understood the danger of this siren call of self-indulgence, and he rejected it, and as a result, he became a better and better writer. Fan fiction, on the other hand, commodifies specifically the serving of highly personal emotions and desires, and pursuing stories with aspects which are uncomfortable or even, if you'd like, problematic, will be seen as the height of discomfort and controversy. There have been, within the fan fiction community, numerous scandals that have arisen over this simple factor. Characters who behaved in uncomfortable ways. And uncomfortable to the fan fiction reader or writer means something that prevents the reader from identifying with the character entirely, or something that prevents the reader from deriving emotional, psychological, or even sexual release from the story. These issues can range from shipping the two wrong characters to writing a male character who somehow takes away the female character's agency, or whatever. This has now made it into the literary world, as I'm sure most of you are aware. Books especially find themselves under constant scrutiny. If even a speck of these uncomfortable elements is found, the writers and publishers will be bullied incessantly until the book is pulled. I have several examples on my website, but my favorite is Sparrow and Vine, which was attacked for having a character mention that Elon Musk was good at business. This is why also in books like
Can't do that. That was a great stopping point too. Wow.
Glory Milking Farm, you get a page-long monologue from the Minotaur about how hard he's always working to make sure the main character never feels like she doesn't have any agency. This is fan fiction verbiage. This is fan fiction bleeding into mainstream fiction, and I think we can all agree, ruining it. The idea that stories must present a...
I mean, the story was ruined by the concept itself, but its entire existence is self-indulgence. So, I mean, can we really go and say like, oh, we're gonna have this thing, and we can't say this, like this person's good at business because they're a well-known person that I might not agree with politically, or I might agree with politically, or this or that, or whatever the case might be. Just because of that, we all of a sudden turn and say, oh, how dare you? You must remove this from your book publishment. You must blah, blah, blah. And it's Karens. It's literally what it is. They're just a bunch of Karens, and they're terrible human beings.
World or a situation that perfectly aligns with the writer's specific emotional ideal, especially in abstract areas like agency, are the direct result of writers coming up in fanfiction communities. These communities are populated by young college and high school age people being raised on a steady diet of internet everything, emotion-based reasoning, and political and social bullying of modern society. These young people have been conditioned to judge worth and value based on things like broad social literacy regarding current issues and having the correct political opinions, which, as we all know, are constantly changing. These young people then take these attitudes into these fanfiction communities where they do all the policing, all the moderating, all the judging and assessing. There is no oversight from literary authorities or even simply people who have a literary framing to their priorities. So these so-called literary fan fiction spaces are entirely built, operated, controlled, and populated by the subset of young people who then indulge together in all their fantasies and desires, sexual and non-sexual. That is, these spaces are perfectly politically and socially safe, according to their own set of ideals and values, while also being entirely permissive. These online spaces to these young people quickly become important and valid parts of their formation as people and, crucially, as writers. So then reading and also seeing the rising popularity in these spaces of the types of stories that will necessarily succeed there teaches young writers that good writing means that the story and characters must embody their fantastical ideals for social perfection and can't be too uncomfortable. This discomfort, after all, prevents the story from satisfying emotional fantasies to their utmost.
It's writing a utopia because everybody's nice, everybody's kind, and those, if anybody does show up and they're not those things, straight to the gulag. They will be punished for their crimes against humanity and breaking the peace.
So these discomforts are not only undesirable, they are morally and creatively unjustifiable. That's why
Which is absolute nonsense, but yeah.
in our era, stories in which a fictional character is racist are maligned and canceled because even the presence of such a thing prevents complete immersion in an emotional.
You can't even show a racist piece or a racist section of a book. Like you can't have characters where they interact, where one is very, very racist, the other person dresses them down for demeaning somebody else. You can't even do that because the mere concept of the racist act is in the book, and they're like, no, we cannot do this. This is not okay. This is not allowed. So you never interact with it. It's like, okay, well, okay, let's okay, they're correct. Racism is bad, so we're not going to put it in our book. Was murder bad? Well, killed off 90% of the murder mysteries, if not all of the murder mysteries, because they're all have murder in them. Oh, well, raping somebody is bad. Move that out. Okay. What else? So ramming someone's car. Oh, well, I can't have that because that's bad. You got to take that out. And then, poisoning somebody. Oh, get rid of that. Cheating on your test, that's bad, get that. All of a sudden, you've removed every possible avenue to have any conflict. Period. There's no growth because everyone's just perfect. Everyone does everything correctly. There's no downside to living, which everybody who's alive realizes that that's a lie. There's lots of downsides to being alive. We fight to overwhelm those downsides with more good upsides. That's how that works. We strive to go from the downsides to making the upsides where we can say, okay, I'm going to climb out of this hole I'm in of depression or whatever, and I'm going to climb out of it and then get to the top and say, you know what? I'm a better person because I experienced this stuff. And I'm a better person because I recognized that it wasn't all about me, or that friendship is what got me to this point, or I would never survive without my significant other doing said thing for me, or I would have never have gotten this job promotion if I hadn't been shown how weak I was at this area. Those are all things that boost you past the bad stuff that you're obviously going to just have. But now they don't even have the bad stuff. It's just good stuff. You can't go up because you're already at the top. It's bad writing.
In psychological fantasy land. That is, it prevents self indulgence. And these writers are being trained to genuinely believe that getting in the way of total emotional pleasure is bad writing. Examples like Sparrow and Vine, which was pulled before release after readers online expressed outrage over things said by the characters, are a perfect example of fan fiction writing mentality taking over mainstream culture. The author even said when she pulled the release that she would rewrite passages so they wouldn't contribute to harm. That's the kind of thing fan fiction communities train writers and readers to prioritize. But
that's when you say, screw you, you're not a fan of my work to begin with, so get the frick out. And then write it for the people who actually care about your work.
having a, as the writer described, flawed character in this book who expressed admiration for Elon Musk's business strategies was way too uncomfortable for readers, so it had to go. Any writer who gives into this kind of bullying is a coward and lacks all creative integrity.
Yeah, and if you were even slightly aware of the online discourse when it comes to political figures or things like that, you probably wouldn't use Elon Musk's name. You'd probably say a random fictional name that has good stuff, right? Because again, like, look at the Jack Ryan series of Tom Clancy's books. There's Jack Ryan novels. It's Jack Ryan. He's not attached to anything else. He's not attached to a particular president. He's not attached to a CIA operative. He's not attached to anything. He's just Jack Ryan. He just happens to be in these positions at various times of various stories. That's all you have to do. But if you're like, well, I think it's really important to put Elon Musk's name in this, then why would you take it out? Why would you change anything? What is wrong with you, the author, that you're just going to get bent over by anybody who dislikes a name being in your book? That's just ridiculous.
But that's what fan fiction does to you. I feel like I need to tap a sign or something. Of course, some select kinds of discomfort can be
Don't make me tap the sign.
present, but only if they are tagged with content warnings. This can be anything from vomiting to the presence of food to eye horror to other things I can't mention in a YouTube video. As long as they're in the content warnings, you can usually get away with including uncomfortable elements, but you have to adhere to the content warning system. If you don't, you run the risk of potentially disrupting a reader's sense of comfortable emotional immersion in their fantasy land. And there are few sins higher in the fanfiction community. Why do you think people started demanding trigger warnings on everything? Now, of course, emotional and psychological fantasy lands are subjective. So one writer's sexual assault fantasy will be just that fantasy land. And for another writer, it will be a story in which Lady Macbeth and Ophelia run away to open a coffee shop in Finland and talk about how powerful and independent they are while they're in bed or whatever. What I'm saying is that everyone goes looking for different emotional needs to satisfy, and like other kinds of tastes, these tend to be highly specific. That's why the tag system on sites like AO3 is so robust, and that's where that began for literature. Tags and hyperspecificity like that only occurs when the readers are seeking hyperspecific content to satisfy hyperspecific emotional or sexual needs, and have become accustomed to having those needs neatly labeled and accessible, because that's the whole point of fan fiction. Because here's the thing, yes, there's smut, and that satisfies sexual fantasies and sexual needs. But self-indulgence extends beyond smut, resulting in work that is essentially emotional smut. Its sole function is to allow maximum emotional satisfaction. If you look at the cloud tag on AO3, you can see some of what I'm talking about here. And these are only the most popular tags, so only a fraction of what's available. Let's ignore for now the plethora of disturbing sexual tags. By the way, what I've blurred here is stuff that I think I might not be allowed to show in a YouTube video. Feel free to go to the site yourself if you want to see the whole image. But let's look mainly at these other tags that signify a work that satisfies a specific emotional need or hunger. We can see hugs, happy ending, comfort, cuddling and snuggling, feelings, praise, kink, protectiveness, self-esteem, and so on. And we can also see tags that are meant to satisfy the reader's and writer's emotional need to see themselves represented, such as autism spectrum, LGBTQ, reader insert, gender themes, and so on. What a lot of people don't realize is that the need for emotional satisfaction, especially among young women, is almost as strong, if not stronger, than the need for sexual satisfaction, and can bring about a bizarrely specific array of subgenres and tastes, comparable to,
Like Milking Farm.
sexual entertainment things. Let me give you an example. Show of hands, how many people know what I'm talking about when I say the word wump? Don't worry, I'm going to tell you. Wump, an old
I, for one, do not know.
onomatopoeia for something like a solid body slam in comics, is the term that has come to refer to emotionally or sexually satisfying physical harm to characters. That is, scenes and stories in which a character is hurt in some way will produce emotional satisfaction in the audience. Don't get me wrong, this isn't always satisfaction that the character got hurt like some kind of sadism. It can be, but not as a rule. This is more the emotional release of the physical harm and, crucially, the comfort that comes after. The emotional satisfaction comes more from the comfort than the hurt itself, so the hurt is satisfying because it presents the promise of future comfort, if that makes sense. This emotional need, once identified, became an object of indulgence. This fan-made, publicly available, highly detailed spreadsheet, focusing primarily on Western media, provides timestamps and descriptions for wump scenes in movies and shows.
That seems a bit excessive, not gonna lie.
And has over 15,000 entries, including TV episodes, movies, games, podcasts, comics and manga, anime, YouTube videos and music videos, and so on. And of course, trigger warnings. On Tumblr, You can find hundreds of users who make Wump lists for movies and shows and books, as well as GIF sets or GIF sets, if you'd rather, of these specific scenes with emphasis on whatever aspect the maker finds most satisfying, whether that's the pained expression of the hurt character, the sight of a chiseled body covered in blood, or the worried faces of the character's friends. Moreover, there's physical Wump and emotional Wump, and this can be even further broken down. Gunshots your thing? We've got Wump for that. You prefer a nice head cold? We've got that too. How about torture, grief?
I need that head cold in my story because it just gets me so satisfied.
Crying, chains, handcuffs, stabbings, non-consensual stuff. Why do you want it? Which, by the way, is all with male victims. Needless to say, there's a large subgenre of fanfiction focused on Wump. This is often called
I have no idea why that would be in there. Totally sane people doing this.
Called merely hurt comfort. You can also see it in these other tags, such as angst, that would be emotional Wump, anxiety, self-harm, trauma, torture, medical injury, crying, comfort, and so on. What does this indulge exactly? It depends on the reader or writer. For some, it is absolutely sexual, and so the story will even veer into smut territory. For many, though, it's entirely emotional and fulfills some attention fantasy or caregiving fantasy, or what have you, of the writer or reader.
I would assume it's something akin to like a man protecting a woman from an animal or something like that, and the guy gets scarred or something, like he gets mortally injured, not like dying mortally, but like he gets cut across his chest or across his cheek, or something happens in the story in which the woman is like, oh, he did this for me, and it draws her closer to him, even if he's kind of far away. He just has his own principles, and she likes that about him, blah, 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 blah. I think that's more along the lines where they're trying to follow than just necessarily speaking, oh, we just hurt the guy because hurt the guy. Doesn't mean that's not the case, because I definitely guarantee you there are those stories. So
some will say that it's therapeutic, which is probably often true, but that's therapy, not literature. And a good therapist would probably caution against a constant, ever-increasing indulgence in works that could potentially re-traumatize the reader or writer. Of course, and this is a closely related issue, this notion that a writer's therapy session, even if it is beneficial to the writer, ought to then also be published for everyone else to read is both a very non-literary notion and is a direct result of fanfiction's nefarious, poisonous influence on the minds of writers, and is, in a sense, the absolute height of self-indulgence. Interestingly, very few of these fictions and infatuations feature female characters getting hurt. Feel free to discuss that one amongst yourselves.
I believe the term she's looking for is misandry.
The bottom line here is that fanfiction has, for some time, been specifically and prominently a vehicle for the indulgence of highly specific emotional or sexual needs and fantasies. As these fanfiction writers grew up while failing to mature and broke into the mainstream, of course this attitude came with them. The thing with self-indulgence is that self-betterment as an author or writer of any kind is no longer what is important, but rather self-representation. The story has to, in every way, represent the specific ideals, desires, fantasies, politics, opinions, and aesthetics that the author values most. More than this, the story and characters have to represent the author the most. In a word, the story has to represent the author's identity. I've had people send me messages telling me that fanfiction is incredibly important because it allows representation and for them to identify with the characters. Fran Lebowitz is someone with whom I seldom agree. However, a lot of her opinions on books and readers and writers do have a strong note of truth to them, but never more so than when she said this: a book is not supposed to be a mirror, it's supposed to be a door.
I would agree with that. It's not supposed to be about you or me or our particular concepts or whatever. It should be something where it's entirely based upon, like, much akin to reading the newspaper back in the day, where somebody writes a story saying, you know, here's something that happened, here's an event that took place. you're, as the reader, you don't read that story and say, oh, that's just like me, that's how I behave, or that's how they behave with me. That's not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be, this is what happened, whether you like it or not. This event happened, and because this event happened, this is the way it is. How do you feel about that? It's not asking how you feel about that so it can adjust to you. It's asking how you feel about that so you can be aware of how you feel. Like, car smashes into school bus. The second you read that, you're like, your throat knots up and your breath catches, and you're just like, oh. And then you find out no children were harmed. You're like, oh. And it's like the person was drinking and driving, and then you get angry about it. And so your emotions are kicking in different variety of ways. But you're like, this is how I feel about it. I enjoyed the story because the kids weren't hurt. I enjoyed the story because the bad person got justice done to them. I blah 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 blah. It's literally just a newspaper clipping. It's not even like an elaborate 6,000 page series. It's just literally a newspaper clipping, but you get different variety of thoughts and emotions from it. And you desire some things, maybe a different outcome where the school bus didn't even get hit because it put the children at danger, and you don't even want the danger to be there around children. But the thing is that whether you like it or not, that danger happened because the newspaper clipping is just reporting what did happen, not what you wish it to happen.
She's absolutely right. The function of reading is not to find yourself perfectly represented in the characters and their environments. The function of reading is to explore other people, other ideas, other environments, other circumstances. You have full and constant access to your own mind. A book or any story is supposed to broaden your mind. How can it do that if it's just you replicated over again? If you want to see yourself,
that would be the House of Mirrors. So you go into a House of Mirrors and they close the door and you have to find your way out. But it turns out that the door they close is also a mirror, and there is no actual path out. You are now just trapped in there with yourself, trying to find your way out. Or are you? A lot of times people will just be happy. Hey, look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me, looking at me, looking at me, looking at me. And that's their mentality. Instead of look at me, looking at you, looking at me, looking at you, it's all about me. Because I see myself in this character. I see myself in this scenario. I see myself in this plot line. I see myself in this particular scenario. That's literally all they care about. They never get out. They are trapped there. Because it's all about me, 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 me. It's all about what I deem to be morally acceptable, or what I deem emotionally acceptable, or I deem to be contextually acceptable. That's all it is.
look in a mirror. That is not the function of a story. Self-indulgent, self-representing fan fiction isn't literature. It isn't even in itself valuable storytelling. All it is the mirror of the author, and therefore only has value to the author. And that value itself is fleeting and limited because all the author has done with it is presented in some limited form the contents not of his or her own mind, but of his or her limited specific emotional or sexual fantasy land. We see this now in
the eye roll I agree with and relate heavily.
Mainstream media with the epidemic of self-insert characters, whether it's video game makers creating.
I actually, when she mentioned that, this is the first thing I thought of, is you have this person creating this character and it looks just like them, which is nothing like the character is actually supposed to look. The character is supposed to be super hot, like model level redhead, and just absolutely drop dead gorgeous. And unfortunately for her, that is not who she is. So then when she makes her character to be that way, it's self-explanatory.
Or changing characters to look just like them, or Rebecca Yarros writing a Mary Sue heroine who has the same medical condition she has, or a lesbian author making all of her sapphic heroines the most powerful, brilliant, wisest characters in the story. Of course, you're more than welcome to, as they say, write what you know, but this isn't that. People who indulge in
this isn't writing what you know, this is inserting what you know.
This self-identity in their fiction are doing so partly out of that self-indulgence and that overall inflated sense of self-importance, but it also has to do with the entire attitude towards identity in fanfiction. Not only are writers expected to put self-insert characters in one form or another into their stories, they are also just as often altering existing characters to more closely resemble themselves. As in, for example, lesbian writers who make fanfiction in which the canon straight female characters are in a lesbian relationship, such as Arwen and Eowyn. Of course, if the writer
Sacrilege! Blasphemy! Off with their heads! You get the idea.
isn't a lesbian, this might not be as well received by the readers. This goes further, too, with really hot-button social issues being inserted into fanfictions, such as HIV. Writing such a story while not actually being HIV positive yourself is something of a fanfiction faux pas. A strange phenomenon of fanfiction.
What, you're not retarded? You can't write retarded characters? Oh, you are retarded. By all means, continue writing your fanfiction.
Is the unwritten soft rule that you can't write what you aren't. This extends to disabilities, diseases, and various specific sexual orientations and gender identities and so forth. If that isn't you, then writing it dominantly in your story isn't always entirely permissible, which is why people who aren't, say, Black or Hispanic will get in trouble nowadays for writing books with characters who are. Just another example of fanfiction helping to change the rules. How? Because fanfiction, given its insane popularity and its ever-growing readership, forms readers. These readers then go forth in droves on Twitter and Goodreads and make demands and demonstrate outrage and whatever else. Publishers, producers, and writers listen and then bend the knee. And every single time...
Well, of course they bend the knee. They're here to make money, and if you have a large portion of people complaining to you, you do whatever they say so they'll buy your stuff. Even if they technically weren't either buying your stuff to begin with or they never intended to buy your stuff because they don't consume that content normally and they just heard about it online and therefore they have to be upset about it because even though they don't read because they have no literacy to speak of, they heard somebody say that it was bad and therefore it's bad and it must be stopped at all costs. And the people who are like, this is affecting our business, think that it actually is affecting their business. But unless it's like smut, which sells really, really, really well amongst women, and people complain about it because it's degrading to women or it's a lot of bad things towards women. And they're like, but we can't stop it. We're making too much money. It's like, well, except the opposite. If it wasn't smut and it was just something that had Elon Musk's name in it or something, and it would sell like hotcakes. It's just this small group of people are upset about it. What would he do? Like, it's the dumbest business practice you could possibly think of, where it's more of a rules for thee but not for me kind of a thing.
Time a writer apologizes or changes a book, the fan fiction fed mob grows stronger, and the legitimacy of this fan fiction way of thinking about literature and storytelling grows exponentially. Why do they do it? Well, I'm sure the troll types in their parents' basements just get off on the power. But some of them, a lot of them, absolutely...
I don't think they're in the basement. That's insulting to the basement dwellers. I think it's the Karens. The HOA people.
insist that literature and stories look like them. Now, placing oneself squarely in central...
Because heaven forbid you have a story or a book or a movie or music or something that does not feed your particular interests. Like, for example, imagine yourself in an HOA. Heaven forbid you ever actually end up in one. But hypothetically speaking, let's imagine we're in an HOA. And homeowners association, for those of you who do not know. And the HOAs have a ridiculously high amount of power over what you can and cannot do in an HOA, which is why I would never recommend you be in an HOA. So, in this HOA, you've got this one person over here who's playing classical music on the record player in the backyard as they trim the bushes or, clean the swimming pool, and all is well in the world. But it's really loud, and you can hear it in your house. And you're like, oh, okay, well, I was not aware we were allowed to actually play music at that decibels, right? Okay, that's cool. HOA doesn't bother them. You go out, you put on your label, or your vinyl records, and you blare yours at the exact same decibel, but it's death metal. All of a sudden, HOA's screeching their car in front of your house, jumping out, banging on your door, ringing your doorbell incessantly, and you're just like, what is happening? What is going on? Am I under attack? And they open the door and you have some Karen there giving you the finger under your nose and saying, how dare you listen to this music in this HOA? It's disturbing the peace. People don't like it. But the neighbor over here was doing stuff, and I'm doing it the exact same volume. Well, we don't like what you're doing. And that's what it is. That's literally what it is. It's saying, I don't like what you're doing. I don't mind what they're doing, but I don't like what you're doing. That's the problem.
In the text is a natural, normal thing for someone who grew up reading stories in which other authors were placing themselves in the text, and who grew up reading by inserting themselves into fan fiction stories, plain, blank slate main characters who were written specifically so that the reader could use that character as an avatar of sorts. If the emotional mind of the reader has been programmed to insert itself into the head of the main characters, then such a reader will obviously write their own characters also as self-inserts. For instance, did you know that there is an entire subgenre of fan fiction that is written in second person? These are stories in which the assigned ship, that is, the written relationship in the story, is the main character plus the reader. So if it's Marvel fan fiction, the story ship might be Bucky Barnes and the reader. That is, you walk into the room, you see, I don't know, Bucky Barnes sitting on the couch in your living room. He says, you sure look pretty in that dress, although I would never objectify a woman, as you know. That kind of thing. It's very, very...
It's heavy-handed in terms of just sheer stupidity is what it is.
very popular. Who do you suppose is the most important main character for writers and readers of stories like this? It's not even remotely surprising that all across media now, writers and artists are inserting themselves into their stories. Why wouldn't they? That's how they engage with stories, by inserting themselves into them, or even altering existing characters to become them. That's how fan fiction has trained them and the rest of society now to think it is supposed to be. So yes, of course they're shamelessly making video game characters who look just like them. Of course they're making their main characters have the exact same illnesses or disabilities or personality as they do.
And those of you who are familiar in the gaming world, not necessarily video games, but gaming in general, like board games, tabletop games specifically, you are aware of, the overweight, obese, fat person who has a wheelchair because the person playing them is obese, overweight, fat, in a wheelchair. Because in a fantasy world where you could be literally anything you wanted to be, you choose to be what you are. As if whatever you were to create as your physical representation in the story wouldn't be you. And for someone like me, this is something I do struggle with when it relates to playing a D&D game with somebody, because I'm playing a character that is not like me, is nothing like my personality, is nothing like the way I talk, has a different voice, I do everything differently because I don't want to be me. I want to be something else. It's a form of LARPing. I'm not like dressing up in the whole gown and, oh, you shall not pass, or no, I'm not doing anything like that. Because, I mean, you can, but I don't personally do it. But it's when my character interacts with other people, my character's a different height, different accent, different sounds, different feel, different interaction style, smarter in an area and dumber in another area than I am. Like that's the character, because I'm playing the character. I'm not playing me. The character isn't playing me. I'm playing the character. And when I'm playing the character as the character, not as myself. I'm not indulging or self-indulging or self-insert. I am playing a character that may be harsher about certain topics to fellow players. Now, the other fellow players probably don't like this, which is very difficult for me to get into D&D games because people don't want me there because I don't play myself, which is also hyper annoying to a lot of people. So why would I play myself? I'm playing a different character that has its own personality and its own way of doing things. You might ask, what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with playing a mercenary character if you like mercenaries and you like to make money as a mercenary, because that's literally what mercenaries do. You're a gun for hire, or a sword or bow for hire, or a soldier for hire, whatever you want to go with. And you're like, I'll help, but you got to pay me. And so they're like, oh, but we don't have it. And the party's like, oh, you don't have to pay us. I'm like, no, you got to pay me. I'm a mercenary. This is what I do. If you don't pay me, I cannot survive. Right? And yeah, there might be a reward at the end, but mercenaries are notoriously not altruistic. So how could you ever expect someone to go into that with thinking, sure, I know I die for or I almost die for people in a contract and for money or pay or whatever it might be, because it could be in alcohol, it could be in weaponry, it could be land, whatever the case might be. It's like I might be doing this for those things, but I'm not like crazy. I'm gonna help the orphans for free. That's not how that works. That's a fake character. That's a fake scenario. So in that situation, how do you deal with it? Well, if I'm playing a character who's kind of blunt, I mean, I'm blunt, but if I'm playing a character that's blunt and is motivated by wealth or reward or whatever the case might be, having other players who are uncomfortable with this fact is just a silly concept in its entirety. Because the entire point is you're playing a character. And then there's also room for growth. Maybe over time, the group will sway the mercenary with this kind of behavior and mentality into a thing that's like, well, maybe if you do help, maybe we'll pitch in. Or maybe the group says, we'll pay you to help us. And you're like, I'm in. And then you sucker them in and you get like, doesn't this, not necessarily the emotional route, it's a very lazy way to put it, but like, hypothetically speaking, see, wasn't that good? Didn't that feel good in your tummy wumblies? That's not going to sway him, but maybe he's like, why, yes, it does sway my tumbly wumblies. I'll give up my life as a mercenary and become an altruistic crusader for justice. It'll never happen, at least not to my characters. But at least I could, as that character, be more like, when I when I was a kid, I saw a friend of mine get cut down by a noble or something, and I don't want children to feel the way I felt when losing somebody close to them. So I might act out of character of my normal, like not me, but the character acts out of his character and stops a noble from harming a child, right? And it might get him in trouble, but he's like, I just don't want that child to suffer because of something in their past. And the group can lean into that. That's the point. Like, you win them over. You build the group closer together. You don't just start all together and you get along dandy and everything goes smooth. That doesn't work. It's a fake, boring game that doesn't have any reason to have a character. You might as well just say, here's my insert, and it's literally just a blank piece of paper and it says, that's my character. And then they go around doing blank paper stuff all over the map, doing quests with blank paper intentions, no motivations, nothing, just literally whatever makes me happy. Boom. And then when you get to the place you need to get and you're like, well, do you have the money to do this? Well, I don't need money. I'm altruistic. I'm like, yes, but you have to buy this object, and this object is 300,000 gold. Well, darn, I wish we really had a mercenary right now that had 6 million gold from all the things he's done. That would be helpful. Nope, we don't get that, and therefore you fail that quest, and people suffer and die because altruism. That's how that works, because that's how an actual world will work. And a good DM will notify the players of this. It's like, hey, just letting you know, just because you're a goody two-shoes or a nice person doesn't mean it has a wonderful outcome. And my point, even though she's already mentioned My Hero Academia and other animes and stuff, the Rising of the Shield Hero. Four guys are pulled into this world and are treated as essentially not gods, but like heroes. And they all despise the main character because not just the four people, but like the entire country despises this one guy because he's this type of hero, and we don't do that. The other three are hailed as heroes and they get followers, they don't get duped, while the one hero, who's the real hero, gets betrayed, lied about, accused of terrible things, blah blah blah, all these types of things, and his demeanor goes south really quick. All the other guys are going around doing all this altruistic stuff. They kill the dragon that's in the hills above a village. They stop a rebellion that's happening over in another area because of, or not, they create a rebellion to stop a tyrannical government. They, just gather a bunch of women around them because it's all great and dandy. But none of them are sharpening their tools. They're not becoming better. The dragon that's now dead becomes an undead dragon, which releases a poison into the, because I didn't get rid of the carcass, it releases a poison into the entire place, killing a lot of people in the village and causing damage to the ecosystem. Stopping the tyrannical government that was providing for their people. Now there's nobody to provide for the people, and people are starving and have to leave because desolation is taken over, because they don't think about the consequences of their actions. That's storytelling. That's how you see that, oh, well, a bunch of girls sucking up to you because you're a hero, because they're looking for just an easy win. They know you're going to spoil them with gold, and you have a constant source of income from the country. And then you're like, oh, they're going to be around you all the time. You get all the women you ever want. You're not doing your job. You're slacking. You think you're doing the job because you're doing something good. But then you have the actual shield hero himself going around, and he purchases a slave. But he doesn't decide to keep her as a slave, but she decides to stay with him anyway. He's not doing it because he's into the whole slavery thing. He's doing it because he can only do defense. He can't do offense. So he needs to hire somebody or whatever, but he can't hire anybody. So he scrounges out enough coin to get a single helper, and that single helper ends up being his attack. And through that, he can slowly build up himself, but he's already lost trust in people and whatnot. But he's constantly thinking of the end goal, not the here and now, the end goal. We have this goal to attest to, we have this goal to go towards. And not everybody cares for the story, and I get that, but it's a good story regardless. It's very well written. It has a lot of dark moments in it, though. But that's what makes it good. It's because there's something to fight against, because there's some goals to be motivated against too. So like, people who are always just, I want to be this, I want to be that, and all has to be good. Stop. You're making everything in writing worse.
All of this is the most natural thing in the world to a fan fiction reader and writer. Let's take a moment now to talk about the one thing about fan fiction that everyone, especially those not in the community, most associate with fan fiction: smut. A lot of people took issue with my joking comment comparing sites like AO3 to OnlyFans, saying, no, there are non-sexual fan fictions. That's just incredibly dishonest and horrible. Seriously, you would not believe the number of messages I got scolding me about this. But here's the thing they apparently missed. OnlyFans has a non-explicit user base. 20% of OnlyFans users are not NSFW, and that number is going up. Yet if a lady said to you, yeah, I have an OnlyFans, my guess is the first thing you think of is not going to be a cooking channel. Like it or not, fanfiction has exactly the same reputation. If I was being extremely generous, I could say that 20% of fanfiction isn't smut of the strict observance. Let's put aside stories with random sex scenes and all that very extreme emotional onanism of hurt, comfort, etc. I would also like to point out that a lot of writers and readers think that as long as the scene doesn't involve, how to put this, the plug going into the socket, then it's not smut. So the characters can do all the other stuff, and there's a solid chance it won't get...
That's not how that works. Surprisingly. I know. Most people think that's how that works. That's not how that works. That's the plug going in the socket is just a form of it. It's not the entirety of the genre. So that's just a silly thing to say. Not gonna lie.
Labeled sexual or explicit. So okay, let's give them 20% non-sexual content, just like OnlyFans. Yet, when you talk about fanfiction in a crowded room, the vast majority of people in that room will think primarily of smut and probably assume that that smut is pretty perverted. Here's the reality. Regardless of how...
Why would they think that? Maybe because it's the prevalent thing.
How many truly, genuinely non-sexual fanfiction works there may be out there, the specific nature of the smut that has deluged bookstores in recent years is the direct offspring of fanfiction smut, which is to say that fanfiction is directly responsible for that phenomenon. Do you remember what I said about Harry Potter, that it was the series that launched 1,000 ships? The reality, at least here in the West, I'm not sure about the East, is that shipping is the core function and draw of writing and reading fanfiction. This was always true, but Harry Potter sent the popularity of shipping in fanfiction to heights never before seen in the West. Everyone had very, very strong opinions about how the maturing young adult characters they had grown up with should pair up. Should Harry be with Hermione or Ginny or Luna or Should Ron and Hermione really get together, or should it be Hermione and Harry, or Hermione and Draco, and so on forever? The primary original function of fanfiction
Or Neville.
in the current age was always shipping, which means that at the very least, fanfiction is intrinsically romantic, but also is often just as intrinsically sexual. As you can see from this random story I've pulled up on AO3, the major concerns are fandom, relationship category, that is it male-male, female-female, male-female, etc., and of course, the ships. If you take the inherently self-indulgent nature of the fanfiction community, combine that with the inherently romantic nature of fanfiction in general, and then combine that with the extremely permissive and shame-averse nature of modern society, you'll get a perfect storm of cultural and psychological conditions that will result in a whole host of young writers, especially young female writers, indulging every imaginable sexual fantasy in their fanfiction writing. This ranges from simple sex scenes involving canon couples to wildly, wildly disturbing torture and abuse stories that are hundreds of thousands of words long, that include themes that are so insanely horrifying and perverted that I literally can't show them to you. Let me put it to you this way. I've done all the dark romantasy, you know, the Haunting Adeline and Dead Inside, and yet I was still somehow shocked and disturbed by what I found on AO3, which stories, by the way, were not obscure works tucked deep in the bowels of the site. These were stories with millions of views. A lot of the best-selling authors we see on the shelves of bookstores these days are merely smutty fanfiction imports. Twilight was Harry Potter fanfiction, then E.L. James wrote Twilight fanfiction, that became 50 Shades of Grey. Cassandra Clare's Mortal Instruments series is also Harry Potter fanfiction. Ali Hazelwood's The Love Equation is Star Wars fanfiction, in which Rey and that emo bratty edgelord are the shipped relationship, and so on and so on and so on forever. And many of the romantasy and romance writers,
And I'm guessing the number one thing that all of these women / authors have in common, they can't get any real relationships in real life.
who are big today will proudly talk about how they came up in fanfiction. Given the nature of fanfiction, what's popular, what gets hits, and what doesn't, most of these writers clearly learned the law of the fanfiction jungle and applied that to their literary pursuits. And that meant maximum smut equals maximum sales. And because fanfiction readers are also book readers, that actually works, sadly.
It also works for publishers because it might be slop, but it's slop that sells. Which is ironically, and I also would like to point out that she's correct that fanfiction ruins everything, but people who complain about AI slop, why would AI go away when AI sells? You might not like it, you might not agree with it, you might have a whole bunch of feelings about it, you might like it, and you might agree with it, you might have a whole bunch of feelings about it. Ultimately speaking, it's not necessarily good, but it does sell.
And in the fanfiction jungle, what makes a story popular? Incorporating a popular ship? Yeah. Incorporating a popular and slightly unique twist on a trope, such as the alternate universe trope? Okay, maybe. Appealing to a particular subset of fanfiction readers, such as the hurt comfort crowd? Possibly. But if you want to take the easy road, all you really have to do is pack in a lot of sex. Many commenters and some people who sent me messages regarding my romantasy video a while back told me personal anecdotes of how they tried to write stories that didn't have sex in them and got like no hits and no readers. And then one little micro story with an explicit scene was 100 times more popular almost overnight. And as we already discussed in that video, once you start to feed that hunger, it grows. On the screen right now, I have a list of some of the tags on AO3 as well as the number of stories that include that tag. This gives you an idea of what I mean when I say feeding the hunger makes it grow. There are more details about this on my website. Because I try to take research very seriously, I've tried to read a few less extreme of these stories. Stories I thought probably weren't going to be all that bad. You know, after what I read when I did my research for the romantasy video. Let's just say my recovery is ongoing. If you ever want to lose all hope in the future of humanity and the literary world, go to the AO3 tag Dead Dove Do Not Eat. Actually, no, don't do that. I did that and it didn't take very long to start feeling nauseous and incredibly disturbed and depressed. Sometime later, I happened to see a thread on one of the AO3 forums complaining about members of the fanfiction community who found that particular tag's contents too disturbing. If you don't like it, don't read it, they said. And also, golly, it's like we can't have anything bad happen to our characters. Sure, yes, if you don't like it, don't read it. But it's hard to...
Ironically, that's what we say when we have content in books where, you know, a child gets hurt or an adult does something horrendously evil to somebody else. And it's like, I don't like this. It shouldn't be in it. Don't like it, don't read it. That's literally that simple. But they don't take their own advice. That's the ironic part.
See the things that are in there and not become incredibly concerned about the people writing and reading those stories. It's
They also vote.
one thing to have bad things happen to your characters. No one's complaining about that. It's a whole separate issue if you're writing stories that are intended for sexual gratification that features so much inhumane brutality that the CIA is probably up on those tags taking notes. And don't even get me started on all of the underage content. Seriously, you will have to drink heavily if you even start to look around on AO3. And also then you see the number of hits those things get and you start to have thoughts like, how hard would it be to just delete the entire internet?
Also, it's weird because you have the actual real life physical world that we all live in. These things are wrong. They're either illegal, they're this, that, the other, but then in the books, it's okay. It's like, why is it okay? And then I remember Stephen King wrote It, and there's literally a children's orgy scene in the sewers. And I'm like, yeah, this was written before they had like child protection laws, but it still sells. They still make movies off of it. I don't think that content's in the movie. Might be a reason for that.
Perversion factor, as with adult content across the board, intensifies over time. We've already talked about this a lot in my video on smut, but the same applies. However, because sites like AO3 are built on absolute permissiveness, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's about 1,000 times worse. As bad as some published dark romance books truly are, they are as tame as Mary Poppins compared to what you can effortlessly find on AO3. And all of this increasingly weird and increasingly perverted stuff is all filtering through to the mainstream. All these weird monster and animal smut books like Morning Glory Milking Farm, those trends started in fanfiction. And because, as we can clearly see from the aforementioned literary masterpiece, fanfiction now feeds popular literary culture. It will only be a matter of time before the most disturbing thing I saw in Dead Dove Do Not Eat is sitting happily on the shelf at your local bookstore. Smut in fanfiction is a world with literally no rules. Sure, yes, you are still expected to provide content warnings and people will prefer more popular ships and so forth like that, but in truth, there are no rules. This is deliberately and explicitly stated by AO3. Nothing is forbidden. Smut with underage characters? Perfectly fine. Smut that would make the Marquis de Sade super jealous that he didn't think of it first? Why not? You want to write incredibly perverted stories about real people transforming into minors and having lots of sex? Totally, yeah. If you want to be only mildly disturbed, have a glance at how many fanfiction stories there are about real people. If you look at the numbers, currently on AO3, there are more fanfictions about real people than there are about Harry Potter. If a man did that about a real woman, it would get him fired from his job, shunned by his family, and would probably be sufficient grounds for a restraining order, depending on the laws of the state in which it happened. And it would absolutely be included in the court documents as People's Exhibit A in the stalking case against him. But when a woman does it, apparently it's empowering and creative. I don't know, Your Honor. Sounds like fanfic brain rot to me. Something I want to talk about related
She's not wrong.
to the smut apocalypse is a topic that never seems to get any less strange to me, and that is BL. BL is short for boys love. It's gay romance, almost always gay smut, between two male characters, which has a disproportionately large female audience.
She's gonna bring up Frodo and Sam, isn't she?
Of course, BL is a little different from any other run-of-the-mill gay storyline. This particular hyper-specific subgenre got its start in Japan. Thanks, Japan. Its earliest form was, surprise, surprise, Fanfiction. Specifically, fanfiction written by straight women featuring two young men, usually exceptionally beautiful young men, not so much masculine as somewhat androgynously beautiful. If you've ever wondered why so many romantasy writers refer to their male leads as beautiful men, one of these beautiful men is the, how should we put this? Submissive half of the relationship, while the other retains a more traditionally dominant masculine role in the relationship, if you get what I'm saying. Needless to say, this has a tremendously loyal female fan base bordering on feral.
But ironically, if you were to change the boy love thing where you have two guys, one dominant, one submissive, and it's the traditional thing, right? If you were to take that, flip it to where the traditional one, the dominant one, is a man, and the submissive one's a woman, all hell would break loose. Why, you might ask? Oppression is the answer you'll get, and of course, they're psychopaths.
This is books, comics, and manga, anime, and live-action dramas. BL as a genre sees its popularity fed by fanfiction, particularly gay shipping fanfiction, which in turn feeds the popularity of BL. This is a constant loop that has led to an explosion of popularity in the East and the West. While Japanese live-action BL hasn't really grown all that much, Thai BL has absolutely exploded in recent years. And in Eastern and especially Western viewership, the main audience for BL is, as I said, overwhelmingly female. I was made aware of the existence of this subgenre when I first started to develop an interest in Eastern media as opposed to modern Western media. And when it comes to Western popularity, BL is the subgenre of Eastern media, books, manga, dramas, etc., that is enormously popular with women. Most Western women I've come across who watch Eastern media include a huge amount of BL in the rotation. With, it seems, the majority of female fans, that's the popular Eastern media here in the West. They read BL novels and comic translations, and they heavily ingest BL and gay shipping fanfiction. In fact, if you go to Barnes & Noble and have a little browse through their translated Chinese novels section, I would bet you folding money that you wouldn't be able to find one that isn't BL. In fact, my efforts to find unofficial fan translations of published novels from Japan and China has turned up an interesting issue in the Western fan community for Eastern media. The majority of what you'll find fan translated is either explicitly BL or it can be interpreted as BL. That is, either fans ship the main male characters so hard that to them it's actually canon, or the novel was deliberately written to be very ambiguous in that regard. And the quality of the works does not matter, provided emotional or sexual needs are satisfied by the story. So people who are apparently more like me and just want to find a good book tend to lament this fact, saying that no one ever translates any Eastern novel unless it's BL, or one could say BL coded. I've heard this called BL brain rot. Speaking of which, recently, I got a comment on my video on romantasy. I tried to find it to show you, but after 3 hours of hunting, my eyeballs were about to fall out of my head. This comment was calling me a hypocrite for being critical of the explosion of smut in literature considering the book I was writing, referring to my serial novel, The Blue Prince. Given that there aren't any sex scenes in my book, I was really confused about this for a while. But then like 2 days later, it finally hit me. The commenter was assuming that my book is gay smut simply because the two main characters are both young men. A very alarming majority of these works have strange dynamics. The more dominant masculine character tends to be older or at least larger, often much older or much larger, and also tends to lack any sense of consent or boundaries. The more submissive character is often younger, or in the comics and shows, he at least appears younger and less experienced, and sometimes doesn't even start entirely gay. Not always, but often. Even if there isn't such a dynamic, as in the enormously popular Thai BL Kin Porsche, the relationship often begins with sexual violence. In the case of Kin Porsche, the series and the novel, one male lead literally sexually assaulted the other while he was drugged, which led to his, I guess, gay awakening or something. I don't know. I don't really go here.
Wait, I thought people were born gay. I'm confused now. Can you guys at least keep it straight? Like, letting us know what is and what isn't the case? Because I can't keep up.
Just as gay shipping fan fiction created BL in the first place and saw publishers create it as its own genre marketed specifically to women, the spread and growth of BL has caused fan fiction hunger to grow, especially for the shipping of canon straight male characters, which in turn feeds the popularity of BL, and so on in an endless loop. The BL fandom tends to bring about the most intense, mentally ill, fanatical behavior from fans. Women have stalked their favorite BL actors, which suggests very overtly, if I'm being honest, that the infatuation is sexual in nature. And as is often the case with women, sexual infatuation very, very often must include a strong emotional element, which is why the story doesn't even need to be sexually explicit to satisfy a female fan's emotional needs. This is why Chinese titles like The Untamed have a frankly disturbingly enormous fanatical following. The original novel, The Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation, was written as a BL, with the author later providing wildly explicit, often disturbing scenes that sometimes featured underage characters. It was so popular that China produced a live-action drama. I've seen the live-action Chinese drama. It's a little lacking in quality, but in terms of story, it's actually quite good. The dynamic between the two characters was changed to a friendship instead of a romance, and the change did make the story significantly less self-indulgent and allowed it to focus on the rest of the plot, which is a lot more interesting than what may or may not have been happening between these two dudes and, that sword in the bedroom. However, fans of the original novel inserted their own needs into the live action, interpreting the interaction between even the actors as romantic, even when they weren't in character. Fan fiction writers in the West and the East started to write explicit smut fan fiction about the two real actors, Xiao Zhan and Wang Yibo. In one case, a Chinese fanfiction writer on AO3 penned a long series that infamously culminated in Wang Yibo impregnating a much younger and obviously feminized Xiao Zhan, who worked as an underage prostitute. This created such a shocked uproar in China that, among many other things, the Chinese access to AO3 was blocked, and still is as of filming this video, and it became illegal to write such works or make art about real people or about underage characters. That latter part is kind of hard to get mad about, if I'm being honest. This is the kind of garbage that flourishes in the minds of writers who do nothing but indulge their desires and appetites and have never been told that such indulgences might not always be healthy or normal. But fanfiction is a hugely permissive community that rewards perversion disproportionately. It's not even remotely surprising that these things and these tastes grow and grow there. Now, this whole thing with China blocking AO3 has a million tendrils, and some of them are from the totalitarian absolute state control Communist Party side of things, yeah, and that's not great. And I have more about this whole thing on my website, but some of the Chinese outrage came more from the traditional healthy Chinese culture side of things that thought it was pretty messed up that children were being permitted ready access to wildly graphically explicit material about underage characters who were sometimes even real people. And I don't think any sane person would disagree with such a sentiment. What to do about it is an entirely different matter. To start with, it would sure help if parents paid closer attention to what their children were doing online.
Okay. For a moment, I'm going to talk to the parents in the room or people who are intending to become parents and other things like that. It is your job to protect your kids from content they should not participate in. Crazy ideas. It is your job as a parent. I'm a parent. It is my job to keep my children away from content they should not be consuming. I don't let them watch content that I watch most of the time, because most of the content I watch is pretty like bloody, gory, graphic kind of violence. I don't let them watch that. I haven't even decided whether or not I should let my 5-year-old watch Star Wars, despite him really liking Star Wars for the Lego Star Wars stuff. I'm like, is it really appropriate? Is he at the point where he can understand what the point is? And to be fair, Star Wars, at least the original trilogy, it's not like terribly graphic. And some of the stuff they wouldn't understand. So if that's the case, then maybe I could. But I always keep an eye on what my kid consumes and how he behaves. And what I think he would either struggle with or would not fully understand and maybe take it the wrong way. Like, it's my job to do that. I don't go to the government and say, you need to police my kid for me. No, 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 no. I need to police my kid. My kid is my responsibility. Your kid is your responsibility. If you just let your kid do whatever they want to do, you're a bad parent. There's no other way around that. That's just the way it is. You are a bad parent for letting your child walk all over you. There might be things that your kid does on their own that is good, and thus you don't tell them that they can or cannot do stuff because they're already doing good. That is not the same as just letting them do whatever they want, which 9 times out of 10 will turn out to not be good because they're learning about something, they're exploring something, and it turns into something unhealthy for them. You shouldn't be feeding your kids junk food all the time because, yes, they will become obese, they will have diabetes, they will have all types of issues, they'll have sugar overdoses. There's tons of things that can harm your kids because you think, well, letting people live the way they want to live. Doesn't matter. You're doing it wrong. Sorry. This is literally just how parenting exists. When you send your kid to school and you're not paying attention to the content that the teacher's teaching them, congratulations. You're probably a bad parent. I mean, personally, I think if you send your kids to anybody other than your pre-approved private tutors or something that you have a very close eye on the content, I personally don't think you're that great of a parent, but that's just me being more extreme about it, where I'm very, very, very protective of my kids and the content they consume. Because I did work in a school at one point, and people were buying their kids brand new vehicles because they didn't spend time with their kids. So they're kind of like condolence prizes. Here, have a new Jeep that's brand freaking new. I know you're only 16 years old, but here's a new vehicle. Instead of letting them learn, like, earn money for yourself, become a better person, experience hardship, reach for goals, reach for the stars, obtain that stuff, and then get your own. Instead of doing that, they're like, no, I'll do it for you because I love you, because I don't spend time with you at all. I don't care about you at all. But to show you I love you, I'm going to buy you stuff. I'm going to get you gifts so that you can think of me when you see these, when the kid absolutely does not think about their parent at all in the shape or form. Outside of, my parents will do whatever I want them to because otherwise I'll hate them, and they don't want that. And it's repetitive. It's not an anecdotal thing. This is a broad, widespread plague throughout parenting. But the state shouldn't be controlling what your kids do or do not do. Your neighbors shouldn't be controlling what your kid does or doesn't do. You should be controlling what your kid does or doesn't do. Because you're their guardian. You're their parent. You're their kin. You're supposed to care about them more than anybody else on the planet. So if I'm sitting here and I'm more concerned about your kids than you are, you might have a problem on your hands. Now, that's my personal rant. We kind of hone more into what Hillary's talking about, but essentially, what's going on in China is not good because they're not taking personal responsibility. They're not going to their internet provider and saying, I want you to block these websites. They can get around through VPNs, but kids probably don't know about VPNs, and they shouldn't probably know about VPNs until they're older, when it becomes a work need for business, or whether it's something to bypass tyrannical behavior from a government. Something like that has a little bit more legs. But ultimately, you're responsible for your kids, not the government.
But that's a topic for another video.
Sorry, I added that topic to my video.
Something I came to see a lot as
And that's the short version.
I explored the world of fan fiction was that whenever issues like this arose, that is, the worryingly large and growing amount of underage material on fan fiction sites like AO3, it was always met with widespread condemnation. That is, whenever anyone tried to say something along the lines of, hey, so maybe we should do something about all the insane underage material on this site, people would condemn that person with so much vitriol and violence, screaming about censorship and oppression and fascism and
That's all the Tumblr and Blue Sky people right there.
all the rest of it. To all the fanfiction apologists out there, this is a huge, huge PR problem for you. If the majority of your community would die on this of all hills, maybe it's time to take stock of what your community is, what it feeds, and what grows there. And
Also, maybe take stock into, I don't know, the content you yourself participate in. Because odds are it's probably eventually going to be only available in the content you don't want to consume or that you shouldn't want to consume, and it'll be the only thing there.
really excited to see all the people bellying up to my comment section to drop some variation on fiction does not equal reality. Let me say it again. I don't really care. The fact that the fanfiction community has, since its inception, taken it upon themselves to defend to the death this kind of writing is really, really worrying. And one can't help but wonder if this constant indulgence in these BLs and underage fanfictions with increasingly disturbing consent issues and age gaps and the underage factor is perhaps a contributing factor in the apparent uptick in sexual crimes against young teenage boys being committed by adult women. The numbers for these crimes these days are honestly very alarming. If indulging the emotional and sexual needs
It's because it's okay to go after male predators, but it's not okay to go after female predators
on the page is permissible, then eventually the idea will enter the reader's mind that it must also be desirable in some form or other in real life. One 38-year-old woman who attempted to sleep with a group of young teenage boys in a hotel while her husband was in their own room told the boys that they should be excited to be sleeping with an older woman. Sorry, Your Honor, that sounds like fanfiction brain rot to me. BL or not, people can argue all day long that, oh, it's just fiction. Oh, we know it's just a story. We're not delusional. But if the whole function of fanfiction is to satisfy the need for self-representation and to see the self in the work, then that must radiate outward. If the self that you see and are satisfied by in the work of fiction brings you intense pleasure, then you will eventually feel the desire to embody that fantasy in reality, whether it's seeking a girlfriend or boyfriend who abuses you or becoming abusive yourself. On a long enough timeline, it always happens. It's worth remembering that studies have found that what we read tends to inform our opinions, our attitudes, and our behavior, especially in young people. So if
I believe it's like social engineering is the kind of the term where somebody is not initially into this kind of thing, but then they're socially pressured into agreeing with this thing because they don't want to be pushed out into the cold by themselves, alone and depressed because nobody will interact with them, nobody wants anything to do with them, blah 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 blah. And then they're like, okay, well, I'll join your cult over here because that way I have a group, I have people like me. And then they kind of slowly adopt those type of behaviors that they originally rejected. Well, now they have that as part of their identity because that's all about identity. Then they take that identity and then they go a step further and they go in and say, well, we need to get more people to agree with us because we're in the right. We're the right ones. We're going to change this world for the better, even though it's not for the better in any shape or form, psychologically speaking, wellness speaking, anything speaking. And then they go out and they branch off and they try to grab all these other little industries and these little things and start forcing people either in or out of those spaces. And then they run everything, like the book publisher companies. And it's like, okay, well, what did you expect? These people probably have a large list of books that, frankly, let's say for the hockey mom or the woman who was trying to sleep with the hockey kids while her husband's in their room, he probably doesn't read the books she reads because it's probably a different genre preference, or he just has other things to do other than read. And she's got all the time in the world. She sips her wine and she reads all these books that are in the book publishing company's bestsellers list, and it's literally just fanfic smut stuff. And then she eventually is like, well, now I have the chance. Like, I read this book once where a woman cheats on her husband who's in their hotel room, and she goes in and sleeps with these two underage boys. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. And they get to live out that fantasy. They don't think there's anything wrong with that. She's completely content. And there's nothing you're going to do to change her mind about that.
A 16 or 18-year-old girl is reading fan fiction with really disturbing content that is meant to be sexually gratifying, it will have an impact of some kind on her character and her perception of the world. If you're curious about this, I have links to a lot of studies on this topic on my website. On AO3 alone, the number of fanfiction stories that feature underage pairings is over 360,000. These stories have hundreds of thousands of hits. The top one has over 4 million. And bear in mind that this is only works for which the writer has chosen to tag. Many writers choose not to and simply have content warnings, which can't be searched. There were many instances when I used the tagging system to exclude underage pairing and still got ships like Hermione Granger and Sirius Black or Severus Snape, or Petunia and Vernon Dursley and Harry Potter. Honestly, just so much Harry Potter. At a certain point, you have to wonder what feeds that interest and what feeds.
At that point, they're not fans of Harry Potter. They're fans of perversions of Harry Potter. They want to see things happen that is already a perversion of theirs, and they pursue that. But that's not their love for Harry Potter, the series, not the character. But like, that's not. They're not going and saying, "Man, I love Harry Potter, the series, so much that blah 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 blah." No, no, no. They're saying, "I read this series, and I think I know how to better make this work to fit my personal persuasions," and they do that. This is why like fanficking drives me nuts, especially in the Wheel of Time community, because fanficking is when you have people say, "Well, I like these stuff, but I think the writer or the author should have done it this way instead," or "This character should have gotten with this character, not this character, because I don't like that character because of this reason," or "Wow, this person's such a playboy. I can't believe that anyone would ever like this guy," and this goes on and goes on and goes on, and then it's just like, you obviously are not a fan of the series. All you do is complain about it. And if you complain about their complaining about it, or complain about the changes that they're trying to alter the story with, they're like, "Well, you're not a real fan." And it's like, I'm the only real fan in this conversation. You're all just freaking psychos. You don't care about the story. You don't care about the world the author tries to put together. You're trying to reinvent it the way you would do it, as if you're the author, or you could do better than the author. And it's like, that's not how that works.
That creation. All right, enough about smut already. Okay then, the final point we're going to talk about today is arguably the least important, but it's still a thing that needs to be pointed out. I talked before about how many of the writers working today got their start as fanfiction writers. The publishing industry will take the wildly popular fanfiction titles, which are, based on what I've found, always smutty ship fanfiction, and they file off the serial numbers, as they say, so it can be sold in bookstores. This is an old practice. The fact, as I said before, is that a huge percentage of newer popular writers, and pretty much any writer currently working to break into the industry, came up in fanfiction. That was their literary nursery. We now live in a world where the popular best-selling novelists did not come up reading great literature and studying history and philosophy and whatever else caught their interest. We live in a world where all the popular storytellers came up on a steady diet of fanfiction and critical literacy. Their literary communities were the, AO3 subreddit and Tumblr and LiveJournal and Wattpad and all those fan forums that
I was going to say, she's naming a whole bunch of stuff I have no idea.
predated AO3. And within that insular echo chamber bubble, the only thing that mattered was the fanfiction community sensibilities. Quality of storytelling, as you and I and everyone with a modicum of literary sense understand it, is not even remotely relevant. Does the work evoke the right emotions? Does it comfort the reader in the right way? Does it tickle the edges of the most popular tastes and excitabilities, emotional or otherwise? Does it respect the abundance of rules and regulations that are part and parcel with fanfiction, such as trigger and content warnings? Is it socially appropriate, and are you, the writer, allowed to write about the themes in the story? Are you, the writer, a non-problematic person with non-problematic behavior and opinions according to the current socially acceptable definition? The
Social engineering.
answers to these questions are infinitely more important within fanfiction communities than anything about plot structure, character development, quality prose, proper grammar, stylistic choices, and so on. Take one of these writers and transport him or her root and soil to the shelves of Barnes & Noble or wherever, and they're not going to magically start to think about these things. No, that's not important. Elevation of literary quality and prose and the effort and labor of constantly trying to improve upon your current abilities, these are concepts that are outside the field of view of the average fanfiction writer. And why wouldn't they be? Why would a fanfiction writer need to care about these things if they contribute little to nothing to the relative success or lack of success of their stories? For the record, I am not trying to shame fanfiction writers' prose and literary abilities. All writers are supposed to constantly learn and improve and grow. I know I'm working on that.
That's why you can't have narcissistic writers, because narcissistic writers don't think that they have to learn more. They are at peak performance, which is clearly not the case.
Every day. What I take issue with is the fan fiction community's lack of concern for things like improvement and growth, literarily speaking. Of course, a new young writer posting a story online is going to be unpolished and inexperienced. Of course, I have no problem with that. That's not shameful, that's normal. But the proper way of things is for that writer to make constant effort to improve. And a writer's literary community is supposed to help with that. Sometimes that requires encouragement and praise, and sometimes it requires criticism. It also requires humility, maturity, and a certain emotional distance from your work. But one doesn't really see that kind of thing in fanfiction communities. Sometimes a comment or a typo or something like that, but the engagement with fanfiction, especially the legendary iconic stories, has little to nothing to do with quality of writing. One perceives, with a browsing of tags and comments, that the most successful popular stories are successful and popular because they do the best at meeting the emotional needs of the readers. These are writers who found a way to satisfy the largest number of readers' highly specific emotional and sometimes sexual desires. That has now become the metric for true literary greatness. Stories like All the Young Dudes, a Harry Potter fanfiction that might be one of the most popular fanfiction stories of the current era, are, by the fanfiction community, widely considered our era's War and Peace. Is it a good story? Like all popular fanfiction, this is a story that has as its sole function the emotional satisfaction of Harry Potter fans, particularly those who want to see a preferred popular ship, the original Marauders, Remus and Sirius, turned into young teenage boys who fall in love with each other and also have a lot of sex. I mean, in a sense, this is Harry Potter the BL. It might make a good fan fiction, but if you strip away the Harry Potter sheen and the Harry Potter magic and nostalgia and world and lore and characters, and if you strip away the emotional and somewhat sexual satisfaction of a popular gay ship, is it a good story? Maybe figuring out the answer to that question for yourself will help you understand a little better the reality of fan fiction. Because here's the magic. Fan engagement is what really fuels any story's perceived greatness. Fan fiction is by definition fan service. So many readers bring a solid 50 to 70% of the narrative and mental work into the story. That's the nature of fan fiction.
Like putting things, and I mean, technically speaking, fans of any series will do this, where it's like you're filling in the gaps, you're connecting the dots and everything. Where the author has this stuff in place, don't get me wrong, it's not always as obvious, so that you're like, oh wait, now I get it. This is why this, and it's very satisfactory, or it's blatant satisfaction for the reader to put the two dots together and be like, oh wow, I wouldn't have thought of that, and it finally clicks in their brain, and it gives that euphoric feeling of like, oh shoot, no, that means this, and then they start going nuts about it, and they start putting all this other stuff together, and they're like, I get the story now. I actually get the story. Holy cow, this is freaking phenomenal. And then they go nuts about it, and it's that feeling of euphoria for being able to do it, which is what they're going to end up putting in.
The writer leverages the reader's pre-existing infatuation with the characters and world and knowledge of the characters and world to produce a completely engrossing experience that indulges every emotional desire the reader has. Take such a writer who has learned writing by writing fanfiction and have them create an original work. More often than not, world building will come out feeling flat and half-realized. And of course that's the case. Such a writer has no experience building a new world from scratch, so their storytelling knowledge is stunted, and they don't even know it because their fanfiction has always been very successful. The same goes for characters. Aside from the obvious overabundance of self-insert characters, the rest of a fanfiction writer's cast is going to be pre-created. They don't really have to worry too much about characterization and so forth. They can just stick to the characters as they are, or they can rely on the reader's pre-existing love for the characters to fill in the outline for them. Why do you think so many modern books and movies and even video games focus so heavily on fan service and meta self-referencing? It's a carryover storytelling strategy of fan fiction. Fan fiction is inherently derivative, and so writers who come up writing derivative works only know how to do that. Building a new world from scratch is something they won't have any experience in doing. They've come to rely on, as I said, leveraging their readers' pre-existing knowledge of the world and just working within that. As a result, a lot of the world building and general original plot development you see nowadays feels very samey and flat. More than that, for young aspiring writers, the insane internet superpopularity.
It's also like it's not actual good content, and it's purely based upon someone's desperate attempt to feel good about themselves and want other people to validate them.
Of stories like All the Young Dudes is the ultimate goal. Who needs the New York Times bestsellers list when your story has over 18 million hits on AO3? Who doesn't want their story to be read over 18 million times? I sure would like that, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. We all would. But the question that I always...
If you're an author, your goal is for people to enjoy your stories. Otherwise, you just keep them in your head. And it's the same thing. A business's existence is solely for profit, because without profit, you have no business. Because expenses will bypass it, and you'll have to shut down because you'll go into debt and yada, yada, yada. So the purpose of an author writing a book, well, one, to make a living off of it, but two, because they have stories they want to share with people. That's the main goal. Making money comes hand in hand, but hypothetically, you could have another job like Professor Tolkien or C.S. Lewis, and your secondary is just, I make money off of this, whoopity-doo. But like the actual goal is, I have a story that I would like to tell, and I want people to experience it. I want people to like it. But you're not going to bend over backwards to change everything about your world just so the majority of the population will like it. You're making a story that you hope they will like, not you're making a story that they will like because you made it according to them. That's not how that works.
Come back to is how that popularity is being cultivated and built. Many young, inexperienced writers will look at how this writer managed to capture the hearts of 18 million readers, and they will imitate it in fan fiction and in original works. And that imitation very rarely has anything to do with true literary betterment. It rather focuses on emotional satisfaction, appropriate fan service, proper representation, and so on. These are not literary concerns. These are not important, and their prevalence in literary pursuits is killing the quality of storytelling across all mediums. Fan fiction readers shape the market. Fan fiction writers produce the works, and so the world of storytelling has gradually taken on the image and likeness of fan fiction. What to do about it?
Stop buying
Easy.
it.
Stop reading fan fiction. Yeah, I know. I said that what you read is your business, but if you really want to be a better writer or even protect your brain, I strongly encourage you to reconsider reading all that self-indulgent fan fiction. If you come across a book and the author's bio says, "Oh yeah, I love reading fanfic," don't read it. Stop rewarding the publisher's lazy commitment to literary shortcuts. If you're a writer,
be the change you want to see.
Stop writing self-indulgent fan fiction. Read better books. Stop feeding the weird monster, and maybe it won't be powerful enough to control everything everywhere all the time. And before you yell at me, I'm not up here promoting the banning of free expression on the internet. Although I do think it's disturbing that children of all ages can effortlessly access some of the most depraved garbage ever written in the history of creation, but I can't do anything about that. If you have kids, maybe don't allow them free access to the internet. My belief is that we, as adults with free will, should be doing a better job policing our own personal selves. No one has a gun to your head forcing you to read that 700,000...
I wonder who had mentioned this. It'll come to me eventually.
fanfic about the gay cannibal mermaid. You are allowed to say, no, I want something better, something with more substance, more truth, more meaning, something that doesn't...
If anything, why are you not insulted that they wasted your time with such drively drivelish slop of the snotty-ish type? I guess let's go with that. But why would you not be insulted that they're feeding you this garbage and wanting you to absolutely 110% call it amazing, glorious, delicious meals, and instead be like, I want you to suffer for making me suffer through your stuff because you're not making good content. And then turn around, find somebody who is giving you good content and give them your attention, give them your time, your energy, and your money. That's how you support things. But if it all starts with you are the worst enemy of yourself, and you're also the greatest benefactor of yourself. It just depends on which one you want to be. I would suggest you be the greatest benefactor instead of the greatest tragedy of your life. But that's up to you. Your decisions, your choices are what put you in that position. And if you want to see change in the literacy world, be the change you want to see. Stop consuming, stop buying, stop supporting, stop viewing all the lump sum garbage, and find the good quality content. Read it, view it, consume it, devour it, promote it, support it financially, otherwise. Do what you think would basically put the entire publishing industry on watch and say, hey, look, we're done with your stuff. But there's the problem. You can't make it a mass mandate. It has to be you, and you have to infect others with the same mentality. And as soon as people start catching on, it's not socially acceptable to be this bad at stuff. People will jump into the band camp and say, in the bandwagon, I guess, and be like, hey, I don't want this crap. You don't want this crap. We don't want this crap. And then book publishers have to self-correct. Otherwise, their competition's going to pop up and say, we don't sell this nonsense. We sell good stuff. We have a reputation, and we want to uphold that reputation. And through that reputation, we want to make good content for you and yours. That's how you do it.
Indulge my emotions, but challenges my mind. People should be trying to grow, and writers are not exempt from this. If you, as a writer, are constantly feeding your emotional needs and wallowing in emotional satisfaction, you'll never grow. Learn to choose the harder, less indulgent path and reject the siren call of easy fame that comes with things like smut. Be better writers, and readers demand more from your stories than mere emotional onanism. Demand until you get it, and keep demanding. Reject mediocrity, reject turpitude, demand betterment, demand greatness. Keep it up long enough, and we just might fix this. Anyway, if you've reached the end, thank you so much for watching. As I said, there are
Thank you so much for making this video.
links to further reading and sources on the topics from this video on my website. I provided a link to that in the description. Anyway,
And I will have a link in the description as well.
that's it for this one, and I'll see you all next time.
She makes such excellent content. So yes, in the description you will find her channel. Go there. You'll also find the original video. Definitely worth your time. Definitely worth checking out all the other things she has. Check out her own books. Maybe it's something that you like. Maybe it's not something of your particular taste, but you might want to support her in her views because you also share those same views. Go ahead and do that. Definitely think it's worth it. But yes, check the description. You can follow me on my socials. Criticalist is the newest addition to it that I totally had forgotten I had because I use it every single day and somehow did not think to put it in the description. So you can follow me on Twitter/X, on Discord, and Criticalist. Discord's the one I use the most because you can interact with me directly. There's other people, there's memes, there's live stream stuff, voting for games to play and everything, all that stuff. Also, check out the content creators. Hillary Lane and the Second Story being one of those that is in there. Check out their works in that list, as well as check out the business section where people who have their businesses run in a way that they support free speech or anti-censorship or letting you just be you. Check out that content as well. So thanks everybody for sticking around for this whole video. I know it's a bit of a longer one compared to my normal, more short form videos I've been trying to do more of lately, but hopefully you still appreciate the input. I basically could have made my own video about the same length as hers, but I like to hear her thoughts and I want to expound upon them in my own way. So hopefully that was enjoyable for you. And thank you for sticking around, and remember, my friends, walk in the light.